Curiosity is a quiet thing, but it can pull a man out of 5 years of chosen silence, and that is how Elias Crow's story always returns to me, as if I am remembering it for him. I see him first in winter light, tall and broad-shouldered, his beard stiff with frost, standing alone outside a log cabin that clung to the mountain like a patient animal. He had money, land, and a face shaped by kindness and restraint, yet he lived as though the world had asked too much of him once, and he had answered by stepping away. 5 winters he survived there, not merely enduring but learning the language of cold and wind. Elias rose before dawn, split wood until his hands burned, checked traps, and spoke to no one except the creek and the trees. When he rode down to town for salt or flour, whispers followed him like smoke. They said he was proud, or strange, or hiding some sin. He never corrected them. Solitude had become his shelter, and he wore it carefully, the way a wounded man wears silence. Still, kindness leaked from him in small, unnoticed ways. He left coins on a shop counter when Jonah Pike was not looking. He fixed a broken fence for a widow and rode away before she could thank him. These acts cost him nothing, yet they never softened the distance he kept between his heart and the world. Elias believed distance was safer than hope. The storm that changed everything arrived without warning. Snow fell thick and sudden, swallowing the trail that led back to his cabin. As dusk pressed down, Elias noticed something dark against the white slope ahead, a shape too still to be a fallen branch. Curiosity, again, made him dismount. He approached slowly, aware of the way mountains teach caution, and found a woman crumpled in the snow, her breath thin, her coat no match for the cold. She was young, no more than 28, with hair tangled by wind and eyes that opened only long enough to show fear and apology. Her name, whispered like a confession, was Clara Whitlow. She tried to push herself up, insisting she would be fine, insisting she would move on. Shame clung to her more tightly than the cold, and Elias felt it immediately, a weight he recognized. He hesitated, not because he lacked compassion, but because compassion asked something of him. To help her meant breaking the careful seal he had placed around his life. The wind answered for him, howling down the pass, and he lifted her without ceremony, wrapping her in his coat and carrying her home. Inside the cabin, firelight replaced fear. Elias set her near the hearth, poured water, and waited while warmth returned to her hands. He asked no questions. Clara watched him as though expecting judgment, but he offered only bread and quiet. When she slept, he sat by the door until morning, listening to the storm finish what it had begun. At dawn she tried to leave. The snow was higher, the path erased, yet she gathered her things with stiff resolve. Elias stopped her with a single sentence, spoken low. The weather would kill her, he said. She could stay until it eased. Nothing more was promised, nothing asked. Reluctantly, she agreed, and in that small surrender, the balance of his solitude shifted. Word traveled faster than the thaw. When Elias rode to town for supplies with Clara wrapped in borrowed wool, eyes followed them with sharpened interest. Mrs. Harlan's mouth tightened. Jonah Pike raised a brow. No one spoke aloud, yet the judgment was clear. A woman like that did not appear without a story, and a man like Elias did not invite one without reason. Back on the mountain, they moved around each other like careful strangers. Clara swept the floor, cooked what little there was, and never took more space than necessary. Elias repaired tools, mended boots, and pretended not to notice how the cabin felt different, fuller, unsettled. At night, he lay awake, aware of another breath in the room, and told himself this was temporary. Yet something had already begun. In the quiet exchange of food and fire, in the absence of questions, trust took root. Elias did not know it yet, but the mountain was no longer keeping the world away. It was holding 2 lives in pause, waiting for the moment when staying alone would no longer feel like survival, but like loss. The days that followed settled into a fragile rhythm. Clara learned the sounds of the cabin, the way the floor creaked near the stove and the wind pressed hardest at night. Elias learned restraint of a different kind, how not to retreat when another presence stirred memory and want. He noticed the scar at her wrist and did not ask. She noticed the order of his tools and understood it as a form of prayer. Outside, snow softened the edges of the world, and inside, silence grew less sharp. Neither named what hovered between them, but both felt it, a tension. When the storm broke, The path reappeared, and with it the unspoken question of whether she would go. Elias stood at the door, watching light return to the valley, sensing that whatever came next would ask more of him than winter had. Curiosity did not fade when the snow did. As the mountain released its grip, Elias and Clara discovered that staying required more courage than leaving. Morning light crept into the cabin, revealing how accustomed they had grown to each other's presence. Clara lingered by the hearth, uncertain, while Elias packed supplies he no longer needed. The path down the slope was clear now, and with it came the quiet pressure of choice. They went to town together because separation felt dishonest. The ride was slow, snowmelt darkening the road, and every step closer to people tightened Clara's shoulders. In the street, gossip did not whisper anymore. It stared. Mrs. Harlan watched from her doorway, judgment sharp as ice. Jonah Pike measured Elias with suspicion, as though wealth and solitude were crimes that required explanation. Clara felt herself shrinking beneath those looks, old wounds reopening. Inside the store, a careless remark landed where it could do the most harm. A voice suggested she had been kept, that kindness always demanded payment. Elias heard it, and for the first time in years, silence failed him. He did not raise his voice or threaten. He simply stood straighter and said she was his guest, and no one here had the right to weigh her worth. The room stilled. Clara saw something change in him then, a man choosing dignity over withdrawal. The walk back to the horses was quiet. At the edge of town, Clara stopped. She told him she could not be the reason he became a spectacle, that she had survived too long by leaving before she was pushed. Elias listened without interruption. When she finished, he nodded, accepting her decision even as it hollowed him. He handed her extra supplies and turned away first, a mercy he had learned too late. That night the cabin felt larger and colder than it ever had. Elias sat alone, confronting the truth he had avoided. Solitude had once been a shield, but now it was only absence. He realized that survival without connection was not living, merely enduring. At dawn, he saddled his horse and rode hard toward town, driven not by fear of loss, but by the hope of something earned. He found Clara at the edge of the valley as snow began to fall again, light and forgiving. She looked tired, resolved, prepared to vanish. Elias dismounted and held out his coat, the same simple gesture that had begun everything. She hesitated, then took it, warmth passing between them like an unspoken vow. He told her she owed him nothing, that staying was a choice, not a debt. Tears blurred her vision as she understood she was being offered freedom, not shelter. They returned to the mountain together, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals. Days unfolded gently. Clara planted herbs near the cabin, her hands sure and hopeful. Elias repaired the roof and laughed more easily, surprised by the sound of his own joy. Town gossip lost its power when it was no longer believed. They visited only when necessary, heads high, bound by quiet confidence. Seasons turned. Snow gave way to green, then returned again, softer each year. The mountain witnessed their partnership grow through shared labor and wordless trust. Love arrived without spectacle, woven from mornings, patience, and forgiveness. When Elias finally spoke of his past, Clara listened without judgment. When Clara shared her scars, Elias met them with steady presence. Neither tried to save the other. They chose to stand together. Over time, the town adjusted in small, human ways. Reverend Moore greeted them without question, and a nod replaced suspicion at the store. Elias learned that courage could be quiet and still reshape a room. Clara learned that safety did not require disappearance. Together they built rituals that mattered, shared meals, letters written but never sent, evenings where silence felt chosen again, but now shared. When storms came, they faced them side by side, measuring risk together, trusting judgment earned through care. On a clear winter morning, Elias placed a simple ring in Clara's palm, forged from traded silver, warm from his touch. He asked nothing with words. She answered by closing her fingers around it, smiling with a certainty that surprised them both. The mountain held their promise without witness, and that was enough. They understood that love was not rescue or repayment, but companionship freely given. If this memory leaves you warmer, let it. We are all tempted to hide when hurt teaches us caution. Yet there comes a moment when curiosity asks us to step forward again. When it does, remember Elias and Clara, and choose the courage of staying. Their cabin stood as proof that gentleness can survive judgment, that patience can thaw the coldest habits of the heart. What began as shelter became home, and what began as curiosity became belonging. The mountain kept their secret, and the world at last learned to look away, leaving them the quiet happiness they had chosen together. This ending invites you onward, hopeful, attentive, ready to notice kindness arriving unexpectedly again.